Hello and welcome to our complimentary webinar, which is brought to you today in partnership with Verint, Auscontact's national platinum sponsor, and it's entitled A Data-Driven Strategy for Digital Self-Service Post-COVID-19 or Data-Led Self-Service Strategy. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and during that time, with the help of today's special guest, Adam Spence, Digital Enablement Director, Verint, we hope to spark your interest, engage you in the conversation, as well as provide you with some ideas to take back to your respective businesses. To round off the session, we'll be having a Q&A at the end of the webinar. I'm Fiona Keough, CEO of Auscontact and your moderator for today. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, let's use the time to run through some housekeeping. Remember, it's important to interact with us to maximise the benefit, and as you know, there'll be no need to take too many notes because we'll be providing you with the slides and the recording of the webinar. To interact with us, please use the Q&A tab on the control panel. You can ask questions or make comments for Adam Spence or myself from time to time. Remember, we will still be having a Q&A at the end of the webinar, so if you're like me, if I think of a question and I don't type it straight away, I'll forget to ask it. I know that many of you are familiar with asking questions, but let's try out the questions or the Q&A tab on the control panel now, just in case you haven't used Zoom before. And the question for today is, what is your preference going forward? Is it moving back to the office or continuing to work from home? I guess that's probably a little bit of a vexed question in terms of how people feel about being isolated, or whether, like me, I actually really like being at home because I can get distracted by my fur babies and I can spend more time with my family. I like my breakfast being presented to me every morning and my coffee being brought to me. So we do have quite a number of people coming back and saying they want to actually get back into the office, or they're having a little bit of a hybrid mix with 4 days in the office or 1 day at home. I've got one person with an exclamation mark. Back to the office. I need more people. That is actually the one thing, is being surrounded by the human element that we all value so highly. And we have one other person calling it a hybrid mix with an exclamation mark. Fantastic. Well, it's very clear that we all know how to ask questions. So I'm going to expect lots of questions coming through because I know Adam's going to have lots to share with us. We have a little bit more housekeeping to go. So if you're listening through headphones or speakers and you experience issues with your internet connection, please note that on the control panel, you can raise your hand, or if you need to convert to the telephone, you'll need to go back to the original email that had the link for the webinar in it, and all of the telephone information is there. So with that, I'm going to tell you a little bit more, or a little bit about our presenter today, who is Adam Spence, Digital Enablement Director at Verint. I know you can all read, so he's had 20 years of experience across the industry. I can't say that you look old enough to have 20 years experience, Adam, based on your photo. Involved in the creation and delivery of digital solutions. And you've been in Australia, Europe, and most recently in the Middle East. You have a Master's in Digital Marketing for the University of Salford and a postgraduate degree in Digital Marketing from the Digital Marketing Institute. He holds a number of patents in the area of self-service technology as well. And outside of that, Adam is a petrol head. What else could I call it? Which I'm sure you're going to share a little bit more about. So with that, I'm very pleased to welcome a new voice. Over to you, Adam.
Cool, thank you very much, Fiona. And I must say that I probably keep my, like many of us, I keep a very old profile picture that I use for these bios. So that's my secret, but I'm sure everyone's done that before or is currently doing that. So as you all heard, my name's Adam Spence. I'm the Digital Enablement Director at Verint, covering the APAC region. So today I'm going to talk about a data-led self-service strategy. I believe that it's critical and important to go back and gain insights into customer behaviours and transactions, specifically post-COVID-19. Why? Because so much has changed. Also, the potential areas of your self-service strategy and where to focus may also have changed significantly. Do I need to help my staff or my customers? Do I need to support my new team that I've just hired onshore in a rapid time frame? There's some of the questions that I think need to be answered. So to give you an overview of what I'm going to go through today, so a little bit of covering a bit of a history of self-service. Welcome to the new world of COVID-19. Why a data-led strategy? What is a data-led strategy and why is it important? And what does a self-service strategy look like in 2020? And then, as Fiona mentioned before, I'll open up to Q&A. So before we kick things off, I thought we could, I know Fiona warmed everyone up with a question. I'd like to just do a quick poll to understand from each of your positions. What are the hurdles to deliver a rapid self-service program currently? Is it technology? Is it customer insight? Is it ownership within the organization? Who owns actually delivering that? Or is it resources? That could be budget, it could be people. So I'll just pause there, just quickly.
Adam, while everyone's answering the poll, I want to ask you a question because you've obviously been all over the shop. Globally.
Yes.
What have you seen as the most innovative ways that customers have adapted during COVID-19?
Look, I've seen lots of different initiatives and tasks. I've seen obviously I've heard stories from various BPO partners where agents have taken residents in hotel rooms so that they can socially distance and take calls. From a self-service perspective, I'll mention a little bit further in my pack, but I've seen organisations funnel a lot of contact to both their chatbot and/or their chat channels to address customer concerns. So there's some of the most innovative and quick thinking things that I've seen and observed.
Fantastic. Well, I think we'll close the poll now and let's see what people have said. Wow.
Now, wow. It's very, there's no clear winner, Fiona, except for maybe the clear winner is, but there's not enough money and not enough people.
Well, yeah, there's no surprises there at the moment, is there really? So is that that's a pretty close correlation, I guess, but the technology aspect is a little bit of a surprise for me.
Me too, actually. Me too. And maybe even ownership. Maybe even, it's so.
Okay. Well, I mean, that gives us some really good insights in terms of how today's session's going to go and how you can support those challenges, and Adam.
Yep. Cool.
So
yes,
let's go.
Thank you. So, firstly, why did I ask that question? This is, I know that what's on the screen is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I saw it on LinkedIn recently and it did put a bit of a smile on my face because, for a lot of organizations, what's happened to Australia, to the rest of the world, has really accelerated their plans for digital transformation and digital self-service. So, and hence led me to this topic. So now I'm gonna just sort of set the scene in terms of the early days of self-service. As Fiona said, I've been doing this for 20 years. Very early in the day, when these capabilities were first launched, they were a little bit immature. The technologies were a little bit immature. Also, when the solutions were deployed, the human elements of design were also not, human-centered design were not included as part of your deployment and your thought process when you enabled them. Sometimes they were technology-delivered solutions rather than customer service and customer experience-led solutions. So, secondly, few enterprises built out these channels until after the fact. And what do I mean by that? They didn't enable these channels until after a product had been launched. The companies are under competitive pressures to launch their product rapidly. Although I think I've observed that over time, most businesses now have their self-service channel readiness done when a product or service launches. Hopefully people on the call are nodding and not shaking their head. But I suppose the key thing is that as products have become more and more complex, these solutions have also needed to become far more complex. They needed to build out far more than the simple predicted inquiries, but the far more complex long tail of interactions. And here's my final, you'll see this as a bit of a theme for today's presentation, but here's the final usability study, your web team doing the usability on the website as another example of potentially sometimes the deployments being focused on a technology slant rather than a user-centric slant. So, although it wasn't, I suppose it wasn't all doom and gloom for self-service, this was a recent study that was made up of 36,000 people globally and 20,000 from Australia inputted, conducted by Verint last year. And it shows that the preference for users, especially within certain age group, was digital. Although voice was still king, either through the contact center or face-to-face through the store. I think it would be very interesting, though, to do this research now. You know, I've been working from home like most of us, and I walk past 2 or 3 bank outlets when I walk over to my coffee shop that I'm keeping alive, and I've observed that those stores have been closed now, I should say, for over 2 months, and I really wonder whether or not those people that used to visit those branches will continue to visit it post COVID-19. So enter COVID-19. I don't think there's really too much to be said. I suppose the thing that, you know, further to Fiona's question early in the session, you know, what have I observed? I've observed that the great news is that organizations have focused on their end customers to ensure that they were serviced, and sometimes going to absolutely extraordinary lengths to do so. Some have hired a new workforce in absolutely record timeframes. Others have funneled their customers and therefore traffic to alternative channels such as chat and messaging. So really, in 4 months, organizations have new staff, and some enterprises have a totally different set of channels of traffic. I heard and spoke to one organization that has seen a growth in their digital transactions by 1,500%, which is just mind-boggling, really. And this has really forced consumers to adopt and businesses to provision these new channels. And if you ever get a chance to listen, we just launched a recent set of podcasts, which you can access on the Verint APAC LinkedIn page. And it's interesting to hear other leaders in the contact center and BPO world talk about how they have had to mold their operation and to service their end customers. So in summary, you know, what I've observed is sometimes there's new teams, there's new channels, and there's new reasons for contact. There's reasons that utilities, telcos, specifically financial institutions are receiving volume of contact for totally different reasons that they would have observed 3 or 4 months ago. So what about, I suppose, digital ready businesses and how did they react to COVID-19? I mean, obviously digital self-service allows fast and consistent service to customers. These solutions introduce ways to address COVID-19 questions in a matter of hours and days. In the interactive virtual assistant world, We've been able to implement new language models to understand and respond to these questions. Sainsbury's, which is a UK supermarket chain, added COVID-19 content within hours. And these solutions were able to service customers' inquiries 24/7 and at scale. And I suppose the key thing that I think I've learned, and I've spoken to friends and colleagues in the industry, is that these solutions have now really been more critical than ever. And I suppose the amount of organisational focus on the value that they added in terms of servicing inquiries has really been observed. Obviously virtual assistants and knowledge solutions didn't need to social distance. So in summary, I think everything has changed, and we're now dealing with the new reality, or the new abnormal, as I've heard some people say. And in summary, the current environment not only contains a spike in contact volume, but a range of new inquiries from customers. We have nervous, anxious, and stressed customers engaging with enterprises. We're in an environment where understanding of customer needs and their situation are absolutely critical. And then meanwhile, at the same time, there's a lack of available resources, and those resources that you do have are either new or working in a completely new environment. And I think that came through actually in the poll. So let's just cover off, before I explain what a data-led strategy is, I want to set some context into why you need it. So why do you need it? Firstly, I believe that even though many, if not all, organisations have invested in a range of self-service programs over the years, and I've been involved in many self-service refresh, strategy planning, investment committee, I still think there are untapped opportunities. This is a recent example of some analytics that took place and showed a huge amount of volume falling in just 5 categories. I think something like 87%. This might not mean that you need to create new or additional self-service tasks under these 5 category headings. It might mean that these 5 categories and how you're addressing them in self-service may need some tweaking. Could it be a language issue? Could it be that you're addressing a certain segment and don't have language coverage in Mandarin or Arabic, or a certain language set? How something renders on a certain device? Are people that have the latest iPhone not being able to access some of the knowledge or some of the pages of your website? How do you know this? How do you quantify it? You quantify it via data. You need data. So secondly, I mean, this example might seem a little bit laughable. The billing team make a bit of a mistake. The call center starts melting. But the cause and effect, whether it be a bad bill run, a marketing campaign, a competitor launches a new product or a service, in the insurance industry, there's a natural event that causes these volumes. It can be very difficult to understand and capture. How quickly we can identify and react are important, and it's all about speed and agility. This issue, in my view, is compounded with the work from home environment, as it's even more difficult for staff to liaise and discuss macro trends in interaction types. I've run contact centers before, and unfortunately, I didn't have this level of data and insight. I remember walking in and looking at the queue length and looking at volumes, and people would just come up to me and say, "Adam, today's a really busy day," and I'd go, "Why is today a really busy day? And yesterday wasn't a really busy day?" And they would just sort of look at me and say, "Yeah, today's a busy day." So and I think at least at that point they could start talking amongst themselves and identify things, but we didn't have the data and insight that we needed. So in continuation of why, many years ago, reason codes were used to classify call and contact types. My team used to do this for me, and sometimes it did have an element of the Wheel of Fortune. If anyone any of you on the WebEx are old enough to remember Wheel of Fortune. It was and is always challenging. I remember I would always just get the team to reorder the top 10 inquiries on the checklist, and all of a sudden our reason calls would change because agents were just selecting the things at the top of the list. And I suppose the other complexity is that a single call or a chat can cover a multitude of reasons now. And you know, that coupled with call centers have almost turned into help desks. You know, tier 1 has largely turned into tier 2 in terms of complexity. You therefore need to collate large amounts of data to get an accurate view of engagement. You know, so in summary, you know, what might have worked in the year 2000 probably doesn't work now, and you need to rely on detailed data. So now I'm going to cover off what is a data-led strategy, and I'm going to start off with you know, a data-led strategy is the ability of a number of data sources and inputs to drive your strategy. You know, taking data from a multiple of sources and platforms to combine with other forms of input to really inform and build out a roadmap. At Verint, we have one such example. It's called the AI Blueprint, and I'm going to talk about the AI Blueprint now as an example. And I'm going to talk about this process at a high level. The AI Blueprint is used as the first stage for all of our deployments of our interactive virtual assistants. And it's made up a set of tools, processes to identify and size up opportunities. It provides confidence to business stakeholders and project teams to ensure success. So firstly, it starts with us gaining access to any existing data points such as CRM, contact volume, any analytics data. Then in parallel, we interview, and you know, on the left-hand side here, so it's gaining interaction volume, analytics, and CRM data on the left. In parallel, doing a series of interviews and understanding the business goals of the organization. Then we take this data and using a set of our own proprietary tools, we process this data, analyze and look for trends and customer intents. And then finally, we produce the AI Blueprint, which is a set of recommendations for automation that include an extremely accurate return on investment report. Due to it being based on the customer's data, coupled with the intent data that we already know that we can automate from other deployments that we gain globally. So therefore we can accurately forecast, you know, what the IVA, the Interactive Virtual Assistant, can automate, and then what may be other self-service opportunities for that organization. And because it's based on the specific inputs from the organization, we know that it's close to 100% accurate. And I think this is a perfect example of a data-led strategy for developing your self-service strategy. So following on from that, this process gains an enormous amount of insights that can help you drive your strategy. You know, it can highlight a number of items in your operation to improve and enhance. I'm just going to build out this slide. And then the initiatives can then be grouped under three major headings. What can you automate? So that is how to allow customers to self-provision. What to augment, you know, and that is how to assist either your own frontline staff or for the frontline staff to work hand in hand with your customers to augment that self-service experience. Or finally, to anticipate, you know, how to foresee and anticipate the intent of customers to predict and better service customer needs. And I'll go through some examples of each of those three further on in the presentation. But I suppose the key thing, you know, what are industry analysts saying about this approach? And this is from a recent Opus research slide where they confirmed that speech analytics as a form of data insights was a confirmed leading capability to help drive your self-service strategy. Speech, in my view, is such a great source of data and input to drive your strategy. And I think it shows you here that in North America, 1 in 3 of the enterprises surveyed in this research stated that the #1 opportunity that they saw for speech analytics was to drive and inform self-service. So what could a self-service strategy look like in 2020 using all the inputs and data that I've spoke about? So in line with the AI blueprint outputs, a simple way to categorize, as I mentioned before, was to automate, augment, and anticipate. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some examples that fall under each of these 3 headings. So let's look at some examples that I've taken as examples from within Verint under automation. So one could be, firstly Sainsbury's, I spoke about earlier in the pack. If you browse to their website, you'll experience a very easy and simple way to navigate their knowledge base. And then ultimately, if needed, transverse that knowledge base and end up speaking to a contact center agent if necessary. Secondly, interactive virtual assistant. So I'm going to talk about Amtrak's and Julie. For those who don't know, Amtrak's provide railway services in North America, and they get something in the order of 500,000 web visitors a day. And Julie assists and helps customers with booking and managing these bookings. Interestingly enough, they also have Super Julie, and Super Julie is then used within the contact center, not to help customers, but to help and support the contact center staff with inquiries that they have. And then finally, Olympus. I'm sure everyone's familiar with Olympus cameras. They recently launched My Olympus, and I see this as a great example of how a communities platform where users can share their experiences, gain learnings, and learn about new products, and ultimately self-service amongst themselves and gain affiliation with the brand rather than traditional contact channels. Secondly, I'm now going to look at augment. And this is probably something that many organizations neglect as the first opportunity as it relates to self-service. And that's the ability to augment current staff and customers. By assisting staff and augmenting their ability to service customers, you're not only able to make their lives easier, but at the same time, service customers in a more consistent and efficient manner. This example in the slideshow, on the slideshow in front of you, is one of our US customers where they're using Veronica. Veronica is the name of their virtual assistant, and she's being driven by real-time speech. So she's able to offer the agent, whilst the agent is on the call, suggestions of how to deal with the call at hand, and even complete some tasks. Another example that I sort of reflected on this slide is that one of my previous employers, which was Vodafone in the Czech Republic, launched a service where they had their business account managers able to communicate to their end customers using a combination of video calling and co-browsing, which allowed the business managers to help the end customer, teach them about self-service tasks, help them talk them through options of plans, products, and services. And it was really an augmented self-service experience. It wasn't a complete automation case for the end customer, but the NPS results and the uplift in sales for that type of augmented experience was quite substantial. And then the final scenario and category is anticipate. And I think personally, this category also offers a huge amount of opportunities where when enterprises really start to understand the data and intent of their customers and all of their communications. So one example of that is US Immigration Services. So I've got a sample outbound email that they have sent, and they embed, and it's a little bit small in font, but the virtual assistant down the bottom there is Emma. And she's including in all outbound email, anticipating the questions that may arise. And then obviously she knows the context of this email. So she, she's ready to if it's something around, filling in of a green card, she's ready to address questions as they're related to questions relating to green card. And then another example, I inserted a bit of a diagram here, is Avis in the US. So Avis in the US implemented into their IVR that if a customer called them back within a 24-hour period of hiring a car, they automatically asked the question to the customer, do you wish to speak to the lost and found department? And I almost fell over when I heard the team at Avis actually come back and say that 90% of people actually said yes, based on that criteria. So it was almost to a point where they automatically routed calls to the lost and found team based on that criteria. And I think both of these are great examples of predicting and anticipating customer needs. So what could a full self-service strategy look like? So I did this as a little bit of an example of, like what could a scenario look like? You might be sitting there and going, oh, okay, I sort of, what Adam's saying makes sense, but I feel like I'm missing, insights. I don't know which insights, I don't have the insights in the organization to help me build out my strategy. So maybe the first part of my self-service strategy is to gain those insights. So that could be, speech or text analytics. But that's really the first thing that you feel like is the right thing to build out. And then maybe in parallel to deploying that the analytics platform, you roll out a communities solution to help internal staff share knowledge. And then you can use what happens in that, platform to really help drive your strategy as well, because you'll gain enormous amount of insights that you can then build into your strategy. And then maybe an example of what you gain through that analytics and communities is that it then forms the driver and really business case to introducing something like an interactive virtual assistant and coupling that with chat and knowledge in parallel. The IVA to service and to automate and leverage that central knowledge repository. And then chat to handle the most complex, or potentially certain sales inquiries that are first scoped out by the IVA. That knowledge platform, I've sort of drawn it covering both the automate and augment segment. That knowledge platform could also be used and leveraged by your internal staff. And then finally, once you've got those assets, similar to Emma, for immigration, US immigration, and similar to the Avis example, you can then start using these assets, for the IVR and the IVA in certain channels. And then maybe once you've got that IVA, similar to the Veronica example, you could start using and enabling that capability to enable your agents to have that digital twin. A mechanism to allow them to chat and to ask questions. And I think it's specifically important as organizations have ramped up staff in extremely fast timeframes. Gone are the 6 weeks or 8 weeks where people get, trained up. Some of these organizations have had to make calls where people get days training and not weeks training. So, continuing to use these insights, if it's not the latest set of statements that billing have broken in my earlier cartoon example, it could and will be something else. And I think creating a culture around the use of these insights is a challenge for many businesses. I found this great article, and I've included the link. Forbes recently released this article where they suggest there's 4 main pillars to help organizations adopt a digital mindset. And this being, first of all, the mindset in the organization, which includes, the executive sponsorship, quick wins and experimentation, this test and learn philosophy. If you were to look, and many of us have read and understand, companies like Amazon aren't afraid to test ideas, make mistakes, and then reiterate. When you test everything, you instill the discipline of relying on the data to inform your decisions and help innovation happen at a far faster rate. Then secondly, skill set, data literacy, including training, how to read and understand the data, storytelling, not just beyond the literacy, but being able to communicate those key insights and take those learnings. And then there's obviously specialist BI and analytical resources that some organizations have failed to hire, those data experts. So they're really crucial for your organization, and also to train up others in the organization. Then thirdly, toolset, having that single self version of the truth, and a self-service model internally so that people can easily and simply access the data insights as that they're made available, to empower employees to leverage data on a simpler and a more regular basis. And then finally, solidifying the data set, basically linking the data to your strategy. I suppose this is like many organizations fail to clearly define and communicate what their core priorities are. I think the first step is to understand, and to everyone to understand those core priorities. And then secondly, link a data KPI to that. So, in the world that we live in, it could be cost to manage per customer. It might be frequency of contact. If one of those is your goal, being able to clearly measure it first of all, and then to be able to sort of pull levers in the whole journey to understand what affects it, to the mindset of test and learn is critical. And then finally, it's one of my favorite cartoons. What could happen if you don't leverage all this data? It to be honest, might not mean that your plane completely crashes, but I think it will mean that you do run the risk of not optimizing your cost to serve model in the organization. It could mean a misallocation of time and effort spent building out transactions or building out channels that don't have the impact that you had first hoped for on gut feel. You fail to deliver an optimized set of self-service tasks. And then I suppose crucially, culturally, you fail to deliver a process for refinement and evolution. And then finally, what does that all end up into? Increased customer friction plus a decreased employee satisfaction. So I'm going to pause there, take a drink, and hand over to for Q&A.
Thanks, Adam. Wow, that was a lot of information in what you've just shared, and a lot of food for thought. So there have been some questions that have come through. So while you're taking a drink, I'll share the first question with you and give you a couple of thinking seconds. How does that sound? So, Adam, first question. What do you see as the risks of not having a data-led self-service strategy?
I think, I suppose in line with the final slide, I think, organizations could go down the path of investing, like one of the key components of the first survey, Fiona, was that people see resources, whether that's money or people, as a scarcity. You really need to be sure of what you're going to invest that money and resources in. And I think without leveraging a data-led approach, you could fall into the trap of investing maybe something which is in trend in market at the moment, or something that someone thinks is a great idea because it's been done in another country or another part of the world, or any combination of those.
Right. So, Adam, another question. There are new channels emerging almost every single day. How do we choose the channels we need to support?
I think it's a combination of two facets, I think, for me. One is, where are your customers or your potential customers? So obviously, if you're a bank and you have something like 70 or 80% of Apple iPhone customers, Apple Business Chat makes a lot of sense for you to support that channel. And then I think the other one is, what are the other channels that you think you can also introduce to change that customer behavior? And I think some of those examples that I gave at the forefront in terms of the COVID-19 situation, I think some organizations have made a decision to say, you now chat with us, you now use these solutions to interact with us, and customers are now far more accepting of those. So.
Cool. So now that we've chosen the channels that we're going to support, how do we ensure consistency across the channels and interactions?
Yeah, so I think there's some cornerstone capabilities that are needed. I mentioned before that central source of truth in terms of knowledge. I think a lot of organizations have sort of fallen into the trap through no fault of their own, but maybe a little bit of a lack of foresight at the beginning. They've ended up with 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 forms of truth as it relates to different channels. So I think creating, that central source of truth in terms of knowledge is one of the key ones, and then have all of the different channels leverage that knowledge.
Cool. Here's a complicated question.
Cool.
How do you go about creating and delivering a strategy in-house if there is limited capability and no appetite from the executive to engage consultant support?
Can you repeat that again, just so that I get it correctly?
Yeah. So how do you go? Yeah, I know it's complicated and it's a tough question too. How do you go about creating and delivering a strategy in-house if there is limited capability and no appetite from the executive to engage a consultant to support it?
Yeah, my mind's going a little bit crazy. There's a couple of different ways, maybe. I'll go down a couple of different paths. One might be actually, trying to create an awareness within that exec team of the impact that it's having to your brand and to your customers. Like, I think that's the first tact is, sometimes customer service and customer experience teams, their elevation at the C-level has not been as high as it probably should or could have been. And I've seen various tactics for being able to do that. Some of it is getting the exec team to start using products and services. And then they actually say, oh, do we play, 1990s, music on hold, and why do I stay on hold for 27 minutes before I speak to someone, and why can't I do this or why can't I do that? So sometimes there's an element of, and hopefully I'm answering this person's question in the right way. Like, I think there's an ability to actually go and say, this actually does have a material impact. And I think back also to the data-led driven strategy is, if you do service customers in a better way and they have a higher NPS, that does actually have a financial impact in the products that they serve, their churn rates, what they acquire. So, the way that I would approach that, if the exec don't warrant, going and saying, hey, let's get some experts in to help us, whether that's recruiting people or whether that's bringing them in externally, I think I would try and bring them a little bit closer to the fire in terms of the benefits or potentially the downfalls of not doing that.
Right. And it is, look, I don't think there's a cookie cutter answer, because what is culturally important will sometimes be driven by a customer perspective, how focused on customer experience the executive is versus staff experience, etc. So, but it's also that the challenge is the cart before the horse. How do you get the data that underpins what you need to do, i.e. data-led, if the exec are not interested in going down that path and you don't have in-house capability. It's a tough gig. It really is. Another question. From your experience, Adam, what are the changes that a business should anticipate from the customer from the pre to post-COVID world in terms of channels?
I think so. I think that let's try to think. So what happened pre to post? So obviously, there's a totally different appetite, I think, for preference of channel. You know, to my point around the 2 or 3 banks that don't have their retail channels open. You know, I think there'll be a lot of customers that, for instance, won't feel entirely happy or comfortable going into a bank to fill out a home loan application or to visit their banker. You know, I think there's opportunities to introduce things like, you know, to my example around the video calling. You know, I've spent the last 2 months of my life almost on video calls, as many of us have been. You know, I'd love to see enterprises leverage that type of capability where you can set up a video call or a co-browse session with, you know, your banker. And I think they're some of the preferences that customers may choose or may lean towards as they you know, your first question to warm everyone up is, are people going to, you know, come back to the office? I think there's going to be a lot more people working from home and probably have the ability to do video calls with enterprises just as they are their work colleagues.
Right. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot more business done that way. As much as I would love to go and have a cup of coffee with people as we used to do
Yes.
and do a lot of business that way, it's probably never going to come quite back to what we used to do. Earlier on, Adam, you spoke about using contact centre data to drive the self-service strategy. What is it we can learn from the self-service data?
We can learn, and I think this is where the overlay comes, where you can extend the use of that data to products and services. And what do I mean by that? You know, if somebody signs up to a new product or service, you know, what are their next transactions with that organization? Are they confused? Are they accessing knowledge bases? Are they chatting to an agent within the first, you know, 2 or 3, you know, hours or days of picking up a product and service? You know, if that's the case, you know, back to the anticipation thing, is that something that, you know, if in a telco environment, is the agent not explaining all of those things to the customer at the time of purchase? So I think there's a lot in terms of the customer journey and looking at when and how do people access certain channels as it relates to the procurement of new products and services.
Right. So maybe a tough question, I don't know. How long does it take to do the AI blueprint analysis?
The AI blueprint. Yeah, so the AI blueprint that I ran through before is about a 4-week process. So at the end of that 4-week process, that report is delivered. So yeah, that's a 4-week process. Right.
What if we don't have the data point that's required?
Yeah.
Oh goodness, I love that.
Yeah. Well, I think, like, I suppose the key thing is, you know, there are tools and mechanisms, you know, for instance, if you have chat, more than likely you have chat transcripts. If you have a contact center, more than likely you have call recording, and that call recordings can be used as a to run text analytics on to basically obtain those learnings.
Okay.
If you have a CRM system, you also know what's happening in that CRM system. And maybe one of those first phases, you know, similar to my roadmap example, is to actually go and say, hey, we are heading in uncharted waters and we don't have a map. Let's give ourselves the first path of success and gain some insights.
Fantastic. So another question, my goodness, the questions are coming thick and fast, which is fantastic. So what are the pitfalls in setting up a self-service feature when you don't have enough data to support your decisioning? Just because you've done it in the past, what should the basis of the decisioning be in that instance?
So this is a new task in an existing channel. Is what I can sort of understand from the question. Yeah, like I think I suppose there's a couple of things. One is you might be setting up that task because it's due to the introduction of a new product and service, or it could be driven and it really needs to be driven, in my view, then based on the data and what analytics are being proven around the customer's needs / desire to be able to provision that.
Right. A question from someone who's a contact centre person. I'm from the contact centre.
Yes.
How do I influence the digital team on the importance of this approach?
I think one of the things that I've seen, and hopefully this is what's in place inside this person's organisation, is that more than likely the smartest thing that many enterprises are doing is giving the digital owner and the contact centre owner a common set of KPIs. So, and what do I mean by that? They're both tasked with the same objectives. So, and that objective might be to increase NPS, to increase digital adoption, to reduce live frequency of contact, all of the normal traditional KPIs. So I think, the first thing is organizational alignment to make sure that they're both commonly goaled. And then I think, you do it together. You do it as a collaboration between both of those teams, the process of understanding the analytics and both of them working hand in hand.
A little bit of a change in tack. How do we let customers know about self-service capabilities?
It's a very good question. There's a couple of good examples that I've seen. One would be making sure that an example might be installing an NBN router in a premise, whether it be an enterprise or a consumer, leaving a pamphlet or sending a link, a URL link to the app. Post, inserting self-service awareness points in the customer journey, I suppose is one of them. Second one, I've seen a couple of times where self-service is heavily branded as part of the proposition. I saw a telco in Europe launch the red button. So the red button was available inside their mobile app. It was available on their desktop. It was available in their store. And the red button really just created, your self-service portal, so therefore it was part of the product as it was communicated through the discovery stage. And then I think there's some more traditional ways, such as, Adam takes a phone call from Fiona about a certain inquiry. And then at the end of the call, Fiona gets a text message to say, you could have done this same inquiry or future inquiries using our mobile app. We've noticed that you don't have it. Click here to download. You can even offer incentives, to put Fiona in a drawer or some sort of incentive for her to do that. But really acting as reminders when customers use traditional channels.
Right, so now you've let your customers know about your self-service capabilities. The follow-on is, how can I support customers when #self-service failure happens?
Back in my early example of the early speech recognition failures and also website failures, I think all of these solutions, I think that the greatest example is in an IVA or a chatbot experience, always have the ability to fail back and to give, I suppose, give value to the value that your customer has put in through the process. So maybe if there is an agent available and that self-service experience has failed, offer them a live chat. If live chat is not available, give them the ability to leave a message, use messaging to be able to capture that need and ensure that there's a service level to respond to that customer within a certain time frame. I think the worst failing is leaving the customer with a detraction for the channel and the business, and therefore it creates a sort of a vicious cycle in terms of your ability to create adoption in that channel.
Right. A little bit of a change of direction again. So Gartner talks about assisted self-service. What's your view on it?
So in terms of that augment, scenario, personally, I quite like that ability that you can be, maybe you introduce a business self-service portal for a bank or an enterprise, and then you have the ability to offer assistance, and then the agents step in over the process. I also like that assisted self-service for, a call center agent or a frontline staff where they're offered suggestions or hints and tips through an experience. So yeah, and I've seen both scenarios work really well.
Well, I think we've got the best question, and it's probably the best one to end the session on today. And I'm
nervous.
Get out your crystal ball. You say you. So, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges or opportunities for customer service directors or executives in 2020?
The biggest opportunities. I think the biggest opportunities for people in those roles, first of all, I think, I think within the C-level, they've probably already gained a far larger respect and awareness of the role that they played in servicing customers and how that happens already in COVID-19. I think that they should take advantage of that situation and really accelerate and bring forward their plans of what that looks like for 2020 and beyond. Don't rely on old mechanisms, old technology that has been inflexible and challenging, but actually take a leap forward and go, guys, this is what's happened. This is the change in environment. This is what the data tells us. This is the art of the possible and how we want to service our customers in 2 years' time, and really step up and present that back to the business, because I think now more than ever, they'll get the support to drive that strategy forward.
Thanks, Adam. I really like that phrase, the art of the possible. And I think that's how we need to look forward, is seeing how much we've shaped ourselves and shifted ourselves in the last 4 months. And it really has been about what is in the art of the possible as opposed to the impossible. So with that, Adam, any closing remarks as we're nearly upon the hour?
No, that's it. I've enjoyed our chat, and hopefully everyone's seen this as valuable, and obviously everyone is happy to find me on LinkedIn or other means and make contact if they have any other questions.
Adam, thank you very much for your time and for your insights and for sharing. And thank you once again to Verint, our Platinum sponsor, and to everyone who has attended to the webinar today. Thank you for your time and attention, and have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you may be. Bye.